Bob has written the best book about reading books I've read. And he climaxed. I just want to read this. I don't know. This is an unusual man, and I want to read you something that he wrote. Time to revisit Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his distillation of marriage in love in the time of cholera. By the time they had been married for 30 years, they were like a single divided being. Together they had overcome the daily incomprehension, the instantaneous hatred, the reciprocal nastiness and fabulous flashes of glory in the conjugal conspiracy. It was the time when they loved each other best without hurry or excess, when both were most conscious of and grateful for their incredible victories over adversity. The conjugal conspiracy. Here the couple is united against the world's ill will or hostility. Take one of the stories from Is Paris Burning, for example. It begins at Fresnes, a stinking German-run prison in Paris, where Pierre Lefaucheur and more than 2,000 other men are being marshalled to be taken to Germany. At the prison gates, the men shuffle toward the buses, and Marie-Hélène Lefaucheur props up her bicycle as she waits for a glimpse of her husband. She sees him and suddenly understands that in the last days of the occupation he is being deported. He tosses his head in the cocky little gesture of affection that has always been a silent greeting between them. She resolves to follow her husband's prison train as far as she can. She pedalled 183 miles, 3/4 of the way to Germany, through 3.5 days without any sleep or rest. As she approached Nancy railway station, she could hear the prisoners in the train begging for a drink, the occasional shriek of a prisoner screaming with hysteria. She had to watch the long line of cars slide out of the station as the prisoners sang La Marseillaise. The train climbed through the rolling vineyards of Alsace towards the Rhine to deliver the prisoners to the concentration camps at Ravensbrück and Buchenwald. Days later, after the liberation of Paris, Marie-Hélène returned to Nancy and crossed the American and German lines in a Red Cross ambulance. Her friends knew a Gestapo officer in Paris. She had contacted him, and he had agreed to take her across Germany into Buchenwald itself. She brought her husband home to Paris in early September. Nothing is as sweet as a man's own country. We learn this from the Odyssey, especially one with a high-roofed house, like that of Odysseus and Penelope with its great rooted bed. After 20 years, Odysseus had achieved his sublime goal, home to kill the insolent, overweening suitors, home where the conjugal conspiracy is quickened and revived. This is how Robert Fagles captures the moment in Book 23, the second last of his translation of Homer's The Odyssey. But the royal couple, once they revelled in all the longed-for joys of love, revelled in each other's stories, the radiant woman telling of all she'd borne at home. Watching them there, the infernal crowd of suitors slaughtering herds of cattle and good fat sheep while keen to win her hand, draining the broached vats dry of vintage wine. The great Odysseus told his wife of all the pains he had dealt out to other men and all the hardships he'd endured himself, his story, first to last. And she listened on, enchanted. Sleep never sealed her eyes till all was told. No conjugal conspiracy like it.
Well, I wanted to write something that was more than an A to Z account of my favourite books.
Yes.
That wrapped up book recommendations with a discussion of great themes. It's very individualised. I don't think anyone else would bring together Is Paris Burning, a journalistic account of the last months of the German occupation in Paris, with Homer, The Odyssey, and with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera. And the wonderful thing about having written it is the letters I've received and the feedback from people about them discovering a certain book. People better read than I, but them discovering a certain book because it was a surprising choice. I met Verity Firth, the Education Minister, about a curriculum issue that was interesting me the other day, and she said straight off that she had read Primo Levi because of the recommendation in there. Yeah. Well, that's a little monument to an author I love, this survivor of Auschwitz, this brave soul, the fact that one other person read the account of his survival in Auschwitz because I recommended it, suggests that you can pay tribute to the authors you like in this way.
In my book I speak of Labor politicians of a certain generation in airport waiting lounges on long flights across the Arafura Sea, catching up on literature and catching up on history and working very hard to keep their minds nimble and agile in times of tremendous dullness. And it's a great gift that we think too little of in these increasingly Philistine and Puritan days. I think they're... I know that everybody in the audience was pretty much surprised to hear that and to know the author of it. You know, so. Okay, questions from...
Well, thanks. Now, some questions from the audience. Why did Costello never challenge Howard, and will he challenge Turnbull?
I asked Annabel Crabb about this. I said, is Costello mad or what? And she said, well, he's been in that condition for at least a year, and the condition is this, that if the entire nation came crawling on their elbows and knees with their tongue dragging on the asphalt in front of them, begging him in unison to accept the Prime Ministership, he might at that point consider it. And she said he's so bruised and wounded he wants only to punish everybody in sight. And she made the most vivid comparison I've ever heard of anyone. She said, he's like the hot girl in the class who everyone wants to root and dies a virgin.
No one else is going to say that of Peter Costello.
What is your view, comrade?
I think he needs somewhat less than the entire nation to crawl to him. I think a broad cross-section of the Liberal Party that says, Peter, you've got to do this for your party. And the ideal for him would be 1 month out of the announcement of the next election, for him to say, yes, we may win with Malcolm, but there's a greater certainty with me, and like Bob Hawke in 1983, proceed to take it. Take the leadership of the Liberal Party and then in his case, go down to defeat, let me say, pretty quickly.
Yes. He's a strange man. There's another theory that I have, which is that having, like me, been brought up in a fundamentalist religion, he believes that he is destined either to prevail or not, and it's set, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, but he's not going to lift a phone to hasten the day, because it will happen or it won't.
I wish I had the video rights to one private scene before the last federal election. It was the moment when Alexander Downer thought he'd take it upon himself to see how his colleagues in the cabinet were regarding John Howard's leadership. So the reports had him lolling back with a cigar in his mouth, canvassing the ministers who'd gathered there about whether we'd reached the point where John Howard should be told it's time to go. I think that is high comedy, and it'd be a wonderful thing to see replayed, or perhaps written up in the play of your book, the screenplay of your book. Any other questions?
Describe Kevin Rudd.
He's like one of those little cut-out figures out of South Park, sort of devoid of feature and full of mischief and so on. He's very hard to read. I mean, I have to say that he's a very witty after-dinner speaker, and he gave one of the funniest speeches I've ever heard in my life 2 weeks before he was leader, which might more or less have been called How Gareth and I Eventually Arrived in North Korea and What Befell Us There. And it was as funny as Scott King's Modern Europe by Evelyn Waugh. And he's very good at that, but he seems to have concealed his wit. I think it was Enoch Powell who said to Gore Vidal, you would remember, said, never make jokes, they always end badly in politics.
Vidal had a big influence on your writing, didn't
absolutely,
he?
Yes.
It's not the first time I've heard you refer to Palimpsest, his memoir.
Yes. And, he's wonderful. We were privileged to spend a few days with him, and Bob more days with him, and He could imitate perfectly Katharine Hepburn, Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, three separate
Robert Kennedy, yeah.
three separate
Kennedy
Kennedy brothers, Marlon Brando, the Duke of Windsor, the Duchess of Windsor, and these were. I remember, and he was very quick on the uptake. I remember saying, "Is it true that your friend Princess Margaret was wont at Buckingham Palace parties to sing and dance unaccompanied? I'm just a girl who can't say no." And he said, "Well, that was part of her repertoire."
Do you ever wonder how your career would have gone, your writing career, your screenwriting career, your playwriting career, if you had done what many of your generation did, Clive James, Germaine Greer, taking yourself off to London and stayed there?
I wonder it all the time, as do you, and as we say in the book together. There is a ghost of Ellis I occasionally meet on Waterloo Bridge, and he's the one that stayed, and I think he's rather less wealthy than Clive James, and less esteemed than Germaine Greer. I might really have stuffed up. I think as you know, you walk down any street and people much smarter than you are coming in their 10,000s at you. You know,
in London or New York.
In London or New York, yes.
Yeah, I got that feeling too, but then I meet American politicians.
Discuss.
But would you have ended up, for example, movie critic for The Guardian or the Observer? Is that something that you would have done if you'd done nothing else?
I would have preferred to, but I did not then have the political arts that I'm only beginning in my late 60s to develop. And I'm not a good schmoozer, and I think in the relevant Soho pubs I would have been gross and offensive and beyond the subtleties of Fleet Street. Yeah.
But you would have been writing for Private Eye, at least, and got the sort of following you had when you're making your name reviewing films for Nation Review.
If you think so, comrade, I believe you, but I have a clenched and vivid fear that I will eventually be found out, and I would have been found out earlier in London.
We've got another question.
Who is the author of a speech that is given by a politician but written by another? And there's a kind of collusion, a sort of a conspiracy of silence about where it's from, and politicians are quite itchy about it. They don't like it to be known, except in the remarkable collaboration of Don Watson and Paul Keating. Who did it, and I'd write magnificent speeches for Bob Carr, and he'd sort of put them down and improvise a speech which was almost as good, and nod to me as he left the room. And this is a common feature of speech giving, isn't it, comrade?
Yeah, you wrote a really brilliant speech for me. It was a tribute to the Barley dead,
yes,
which I gave in Parliament. But I did have to change large parts of it, and I was surprised when I revisited it because it appeared in a collection of Australian obituaries,
yes,
that there was more of it than I remembered going in there.
Yes.
And there were things that you wrote that I just couldn't accept. You said terrorism will never be defeated with military force. Well, I couldn't live with that because military force would be a big part of how you defeat terrorism. But the parts you contributed were matchless.
Mm. And I
They
can't.
were just matchless. It was a beautiful speech, and there's nothing like the confidence a politician feels when you've got a black folder and there's a speech in it, the rhythms of which you now know intimately. You're ready to give it. You've cut out a lot, so it's down to the minimum. But you know that from Freudenberg or from Ellis, they're the very best they could contribute. And at that moment, I suppose it's like Obama in Grant Park.
Yes.
Who worries what part of the speech came from him or his speechwriter, the speechwriter anticipating what he would want, or parts of the speech modified by Obama? There was an authenticity that persuaded you they were, however they got onto the printed page, his words.
And of that speech, of course, the best words were by W.B. Yeats, which was about the dead. To murmur name upon name as a mother names her child when sleep at last has come, on limbs that had run wild. It's, so...
And then at the other end,
the authorship goes a long way.
Yeah, and the other end of the spectrum, I had to give, as Premier, I had to give an award each year to the bravest dog in New South Wales. So there'd be a ceremony at Parliament House where Fido would come in, and I'd have to give a speech before Fido's owners and the rest. So you got the job of writing that speech.
Yes.
And it was pure gold. It was minted magic. You had me saying on one occasion, as we contemplate what Fido did in rescuing the family from the burning house, and Fido was there being held by his mistress next to me, as we contemplate what Fido did in rescuing the family from the burning house, we know again that dogs are better humans than we are.
And then he said...
It was worth winning elections just to be able to deliver a line like that.
And then he said, Fido, step forward.
And then so if you're a premier, you're so brain dead at the end of the day, you cannot come up with lines like that. You need a speechwriter who's slept in. And then you forced me to baptise a member of the opposition front bench as a vertical corgi, and that stuck, and he lost his seat. Yeah. But as I went into Parliament the next day, you enabled me to say, looking at him, listen, I presented an award to Fido last night for bravery. Fido is a friend of mine. I know Fido. You are no Fido.
Needless to say, the member in question was a monarchist, and that was where it came from.
So, I mean, you're a little like those members of that Soviet generously funded orchestra sitting around with nothing to do all day, but come up at the very end of it with a single stroke of genius, and that justifies your government payroll.
Narrowly, Bob Carr was once asked what his greatest indulgence was, and he said, Bob Ellis. The question is, you've favoured Beazley, but he was ardent for the Iraq venture, and which was the worst thing. He wasn't. He actually was against it all along. There's a lot of things about Beazley which people get quite wrong. People think that he voted for the Tampa tyranny. He voted against it. They changed the wording of it. He would have voted for it earlier in the day, but they changed the wording through the day. He voted against it, and Beazley is much misunderstood. I mean, Beazley's very good on the Middle East. He told me he said, watch out for the Wahhabi. They are mean mothers. He was very informed, and to the best of my knowledge, he was never in favour of Iraq.
He supported the first Gulf War, which might give rise to this misunderstanding, but I've heard him quite passionate against the Bush adventure in Iraq.
Yes. The question is, how is Obama travelling, or are the problems facing him insurmountable?
Well, we know two things about him at this early time. One is that he's got the capacity to do more than one thing at once. So he can have a stimulus package and a budget designed to address the economic calamity that he's inherited. But at the same time, he's initiating a broad-based peace in the Middle East. He's pushing for cap-and-trade legislation in the Congress. He had that initiative the other day on, even in the middle of this crisis and the collapse of American automakers, an initiative for tougher emission standards. Now, and that's the result of his intelligence and his temperament. He can tackle more than one thing at once, and I think that is very, very encouraging. And they're big, bold things too. Peace in the Middle East, global warming, as well as the economic crisis. The second thing we know about him is that he's so damned eloquent. And and eloquence has a practical effect. It means building and holding support. It means maintaining public respect. It means smothering your opposition. The speech he gave in the university after the campaign against him on abortion, Notre Dame University, was very good because he was able to build up the things that a pro-choice person like he had in common with opponents of abortion. And I thought that was outstanding. It's because of his eloquence that he got elected president, probably. Faced with the challenge over the sermons of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, shame on America, he was able to give a speech that dealt brilliantly with the issue of race in American politics. Eloquence counts. So, two things in his favour. He's got a broad agenda, and second, he's able to sell it.
I'd go along with all of that. He has cool, and he has patience, and he has high intelligence, and he has intellectual courage, and he tends to prevail when you think nobody can. He's also, incidentally, one of the great American writers, and alongside Huckleberry Finn and Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye, you must put his book on your shelf. She's asking, on the basis of my old acquaintance and qualified esteem for Malcolm Turnbull, if I might vote for him and not Rudd. I don't think so. I think Malcolm is one of those troubled souls like, say, Peter Collins, who could equally have been in the right wing of the Labor Party or the left wing of the Liberal Party, and mainly under pressure of his wife, who comes from Liberal Party aristocracy. He went the wrong way and is paying for it by the day as we speak.
Over here.
The question is, how does a politician treat Piers Ackerman and Fox News? And I note that since Obama's victory, the influence and indeed the confidence of Fox News is shrivelling, and they are becoming more and more like a mad religious cult. There is a man recruited to them called Glenn Beck who alleges that as we speak Obama is building concentration camps for Christians, you know. And so do you have anything?
Yeah, I think Roger Ailes, who's the manager of Fox News, is on the mad side of the extreme right wing. Apparently he'll leave his office on Madison Avenue and go round the corner to phone up the then President George W. Bush, from a public phone, because he thinks the Democrats have got his phone tapped, and he wanted to talk to the Republican president without them knowing what he was up to. Now that is insane behaviour. He runs Fox News. He's turned it into that propaganda machine. But I've got the same sense as you. I watch it out of a morbid interest. And I just think they're becoming so hysterical that Americans who are looking at them and listening to Obama will think, we're not going near you. And I hope it fails.
Roger Ailes goes back a long way. He ran Nixon's 1968 campaign successfully and George Bush Sr.'s campaign, and he was famously noted yelling out at George Bush, "Don't stand like that, don't talk like that, you look like a goddamn fairy."
The campaign in 68 was very interesting. It was a forerunner of all that was to come in Republican politics, because they played the race card.
Yes.
They said, we the Republicans for the first time can pick up the South. And for 100 years the South has all voted Democratic, and there's one way we do it, by running using codified language against black America.
Law and order was one, yes.
Law and order and states' rights, and that
crisis in the inner cities.
Yeah, that racial appeal was the basis for Republican power, and it gave them the South. And it was only with candidates from the South like Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton the Democrats were able to get through, and only in an economic crisis to win this time against that solid Republican voting base of all the southern states, where bottled up white male anger and resentment of blacks was the blood of the Republican Party, the lifeblood of the Republican Party. Ailes and Nixon invented that.
Yeah, and they invented the encoding, and it's wonderful how many distant ways it comes back. Like with Obama, it was, we do not know him. I mean, he'd written a very frank autobiography, 2 very frank autobiographies, and we do not know him, but all they meant was black man, foreign name, foreign country. Darth Vader, you know, the dark side.
And the key, I'll just say this quickly, the key to Obama's style in the campaign was to offer people assurance. If he'd ever lost his temper, if he'd ever behaved angrily or emotionally, that would have fed a white American prejudice against black males.
Against angry black men.
So he had to be calm throughout, and people would say, in these debates, why isn't he displaying more passion? Well, it was quite deliberate. He couldn't display passion. That's emotion. That's anger. He had to be always studied and calm. And he really won the campaign. He really won the campaign in the nicest possible way by being what he was.
Good. One or two more questions.
You like Palin. You've got to talk about Palin. She's interesting.
She was amazing. She was... It's amazing how desperate they get. They found a woman who spoke in tongues and was frequently pregnant, and had a pregnant daughter whose boyfriend has deserted her and sued her for the custody of the sprog. I believe what happened was this, that McCain wanted Joe Lieberman on the ticket, and the anti-abortion end of the Republican Party wouldn't wear him, even though he was a Democrat or an ex-Democrat and therefore very suitable. And I think McCain threw a hissy fit and said, all right, I'll get that idiot woman from Alaska then, bring her down. You know. I think it literally happened as swiftly and as stupidly as that.
And Bob, that brings our time to an end. Congratulations with this big, generous volume. The print size is very good, but you get, look how thick it is, you get a lot of value for this book, and it's really contemporary history. He captures the history of our times. Indeed, as I say in commending it, it warrants description with Homer and Tolstoy.
Thank you.